Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
We see on television the graphic pictures of the tragedy involved with airline disasters, such as the recent one in Detroit. We read it in the newspapers. We hear about the increasing number of consumer complaints of the airlines regarding late flights, regarding lost baggage. Do airline passengers think the skies are friendly, that in fact airlines do get them there with care? Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll talk about these issues. Are the skies safe? Is service good? Our panelists are Jeff Franklin, who is Customer Service Manager in Muncie for Continental Express Commuter, Bill Mosier from the Marketing Department here at Ball State University, and John Rouse, our Executive Producer and a member of the Political Science faculty here at Ball State. Jeff, to you first. Is there a problem with safety and a problem with service, or should we not even take these issues together?
Obviously, there are some problems. There wouldn't be the uproar that there is. It's less an issue of safety. The safety speaks for itself than it is a problem of service. There are some problems in customer service at this time.
You say you tend to downplay the safety angle of it. Are the airways safe?
Absolutely. There's no safer mode of transportation, and there never has been. The statistics speak for themselves. We carry 418 million passengers in the past year. There are a few incidents that are tragic. We don't want them to happen, but it's still the safest mode of transportation.
If you look at the data, if you look at what data do you look at to be able to say that?
We are looking at incidents, accidents involving commercial as well as private, the general aviation aspect of it, the incidents of pilot error, anything reported to the National Transportation Safety Board. They look into each and every incident. It is still by far and away the best mode of travel.
Then we don't need the NTSB to give us new regulations. We don't need Congress to pass new legislation.
We do not need new legislation. We need the federal government and the Federal Aviation Administration to adhere to more strongly the laws that are on the books.
John Rouse.
Jeff, it seems that perhaps you're correct in terms of your statement about the safety record. However, it also appears that the perceptions of the customer, the perceptions are changing. And the perception seems to be that the margin of safety is decreasing. Do you think this is correct?
I agree the perception is possibly changing, but I think it's due to more of the report of these incidents in the media, the television media. Talk to a passenger that's getting off of a flight. They applaud the service for the most part. I've heard so many people congratulate our pilots or say, excellent flight, beautiful flight. A lot of this is just, I think it's generated by the sensationalism of an incident happening.
But are pilots not taking their work for granted? And is there not the concern about how do you evaluate the quality of service, both in terms of flight but also in terms of customer service?
Well, let me address one of those issues one at a time. Pilots taking their jobs for granted. I work closely with crews and the operations aspect of it. I think these people are the most professional people in any business I've ever been involved in. Through a day-to-day basis, they take extreme pride in their jobs. They are very aware of the fact not only of the passenger safety but their own. A safety aspect of it is to ask a pilot the most dangerous part of his day is driving back and forth to work on the highway, and he is serious about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Aren't these pilots being more challenged though by the increased amount of congestion over the major hubs and this sort of thing? Is it something where it's far? I know the controllers are also, but I mean the Department of Transportation Dole just came out and changed the regulations, or at least the requirements around like Los Angeles and this sort of thing, as far as the control over the mixing of the small private aircraft and the large ones. Is this something that is changing their job? Is it almost becoming unwieldy or unmanageable for some of the pilots, even though they are highly professional?
I don't think so. I think that there is more congestion, but you have to. This doesn't change the system as much as a lot of people would believe. The air traffic controllers in the Chicago area, for instance, are the best in the business, in the air traffic control system, as they are in L.A., Atlanta, Newark, New York, LaGuardia, any of those airports.
Let me extend on that, though.
Yes,
Do
go
we
ahead.
need something such as transponders on smaller planes?
Absolutely.
So that you could then, the controllers could do their job better and could communicate with and advise the pilots much more
I think that's
effectively?
something that the federal government can regulate, and it definitely needs to be done. That does give the air traffic controllers a lot tougher job trying to regulate smaller and slower. This is an important part, slower
Right.
aircraft in busy airspace, and they should be required to have the transponders.
Which would what? Just allow the communication to
It allows the air traffic controller to denote the altitude and speed of the smaller aircraft.
In other words,
John?
it makes it so they can see them.
They can see these aircraft,
Right.
And they can't
in
now.
The flow, and they cannot now.
It's a guessing game now. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
John, we talked about perceptions of people, and of course the political system reacts to people's perceptions, not necessarily to reality. And you get a case like this where people perceive a safety problem or they complain loudly about service problems, you're going to get a short-term political response, right?
Well, there are three kinds of politics. One kind of politics is partisan politics. This issue is not a partisan issue. It is not an issue the Republicans are using or the Democrats are using. This issue would be a policy politics issue in terms of deregulation. Should policy be deregulated or more regulations be implied? Policy politics. A third kind of politics really comes into bear here, and that is system politics. System politics involves skills and knowledge and expertise. Now, systems in terms of this focus upon departments and agencies. The FAA was established in 1958. It's the Federal Aviation Administration. It's ironic in a sense that this organization, the FAA, operates and regulates and hires all the controllers. If the controllers were hired by a professional association, a private professional association, they'd be under completely different rules and regulations. Also, in terms of the FAA makes the regulations in terms of the planes and that kind of thing. And the CAB used to exist until 1978. It was established in 1938 as an agency. Now, the NTSB, another acronym,
Sounds
the
like
national,
alphabet soup.
yeah, it is. It's the National Transportation Safety Board. Now, they're completely separate. When a plane crashes or when the train crashes, as it did several months ago in the Eastern Corridor, the NTSB personnel come in and pick up the parts of the plane and do the investigation. So in terms of system politics, you have the chicken separated from the fox, because otherwise the fox, being the FAA, would come eat up the NTSB. So now this is a roundabout way of saying, but this is system politics, and it really can be pretty interesting, especially when billions of dollars are involved, as in this industry, and also the lives of people with all this publicity.
Well, is it likely that we're going to get a political response, a strong political response, even out of Congress?
I think one will come, but it will come in an evolutionary way, because this is a system politics issue more so than a partisan politics issue. It'll be evolutionary, and I think it'll be gradual, but there will be some evolving consensus which we don't know at this time.
Well, we'll get some response, but is this not like Bobby Kennedy or John Lennon being shot by a handgun, that when this happens, the publicity sensational angle of it gets people to call for handgun regulation, but then the issue tends to die down as time
Even much
takes
more
care
so. I mean, there are so many more fatalities due to handguns every year than there are airline incidents. It's ridiculous. And yet there's more public outcry.
But see, I have one serious concern about this whole thing as far as system politics. As long as, every time we go on that plane, we say, surely this plane is not going to crash with us on it. But the system politics does not protect those people who've been killed. And so where do we bring in the evaluation systems upon professionals? Airline pilots are becoming very much like doctors. And if the airline pilots or the controllers do not clean up their own industry, somebody else is going to come in there and do it, as is the case in every professional industry.
How are airline pilots becoming much like doctors? I'm not sure. about that.
Okay, they're becoming like doctors in the sense that they perceive that the lay people don't know anything about this. They shouldn't have any input into the process. And when you go to a doctor, they have the same kind of attitude.
And they tend to protect their own.
And they tend to protect their own.
Is that true, Jeff?
Sure it is. It's true in any profession. If it's a house painter, he's going to do the same thing. This is a much more technological level. We understand that. There is a tendency to have that sort of prejudice that you do if you're involved in the industry, especially a highly technical one like this. You know better than anyone else how to solve the problem. And this is the way a lot of the industry looks at the federal government. And I don't think they're too far wrong from that. That's why they don't want regulation to be instituted again.
But
You brought up an interesting point. It's possible that if air traffic controllers were privately operated by a private agency, they may be a more efficient operating group anyway.
Yeah, and see, I'm not really picking on the airline controllers or the pilots, because the teachers, and of course Bill and I are teachers, and also preachers, and we know about Jim and Tammy. I mean, so if every industry does not come in and police and clean up its own industry, it'll be done from the outside.
Absolutely. But has the airline industry reached that point? Is that the way the public perceives it? Is that the way the federal government perceives it? I think the industry can clean itself up much better than the federal government does. Let's understand one thing. The federal government is not completely out of the airline industry. They regulate all safety regulations. They still, through the Department of Transportation, have a lot of say-so in routings, although that is not regulated any longer. And the consumer aspect of the industry.
Is that good?
They're not completely out of it.
Or should they deregulate more? Should the government get more out of the business?
I think that I think it's at a good balance right now. If they apply the force where it needs to be applied, where it should be applied, and leave things alone that should be left alone right now.
Are you saying they backed off too much, and they in other words, in this transitional period where the deregulation is still being implemented, that there's almost a moratorium? There's a kind of things aren't really being carried out that are on the books during this period because nobody really knows. It's a new era.
I see what you're saying. It's possible that they don't know actually some areas where they need to go into more strongly.
They're in a learning process right now.
Absolutely. Before we were discussing the aspects of antitrust in this whole situation. Right at the beginning of deregulation back in 78 and 79, I think in that period right through 1984, around 200 new airlines emerged, smaller carriers, the commuter regional type carriers. There are around 40 of those left. They flourished for a while and died off due to economics primarily. At that time, there was a lot of discussion about each airline has a designation code which they show up in a computer reservation system. And at that time, every airline had an individual code. Through the early 80s, right to around 1985, that was true. At that time, several of the major carriers began contracting the small regional carriers like the one that I work for to carry passengers into their hubs. And they were allowed to use that major airline's designator code in the reservations computer. So in other words, a smaller carrier flying non-jet type equipment would show up as a United Airlines flight. This was fought over quite a bit in the Department of Transportation. They wanted it. A lot of airlines wanted it dropped because it was prejudicing several carriers out of the reservation system and causing them economic problems. That is an area where the Department of Transportation could have stepped in to do a lot for helping the smaller companies, which they did not. And now you see the trend towards several mega airlines again.
If I can ask a kind of related question, one criticism says that it's not the issue of deregulation, but it's the issue of antitrust. The fact that the federal government allows these big airlines to gobble up the small airlines. What do you think about that argument, Bill?
I really think that antitrust is a legitimate issue that has to be addressed. I don't think you can ignore that. The thing that makes me reluctant to just, across the board or offhand to say yes in response, that is the issue. You're seeing a tremendous change. Let me draw a parallel. Tremendous change in American industry. In reality, when we look at American industry generally, our perception is the average size of American firms, American manufacturing firms, is larger. That's wrong. It's reducing. It's reducing significantly. So what I'm saying is it's going through a transition, and I think Jeff alluded to that when he's talking about them contracting to have someone do work for them. What you're going to see is you're going to see these very large ones as a financial entity, but they're not really going to be strictly one unit. It's going to be one unit managing others that will in effect be service auxiliaries or subsidiaries of that. And I think that's what you're going to have. I don't know that that's all bad if you have, one of the things that they're talking about now in the government is publicizing the statistics. If the stats are out, the consumer has the option of saying, hey, I don't want to use this airline and I'm not going to use this airline, and they can vote with their pocketbook. That will happen if it's highly publicized. In other words, you have to have some way for the consumer to be aware of that and to respond to that. So I don't know that you're going to ever have a total monopoly situation, and I think that's what the antitrust thing really relates to. If there is a particular area that has a lot of demand, then other airlines are going to come in there.
So you're saying, in a sense, that and economies of scale is beginning to take place in the industry, and this industry basically is fairly new, isn't it? I mean, 10 years.
Absolutely.
It's just basically getting us learning what it really has in terms of potential. It was so controlled, so regulated, that there was no knowledge of exactly what was a legitimate economy of scale with it. There was no history there because it was, and I'll draw on another analogy. Banking is going through a tremendous transition now because they were so highly regulated. They're just learning what marketing is all about now because they didn't have to before. And I think the airlines are in the same situation. They're really amateur. They're really neophytes when it comes to marketing because they didn't have to worry about it. They were so regulated they couldn't compete.
Right. You're very perceptive about that. So this is an industry in flux trying to find its balance, and it may not happen for 4 or 5 years or more down the road.
But it needs a lot of oversight and watching for safety during that period.
It needs a lot of monitoring, and that's where the federal government can step in and do that job while it leaves its hands off the economic aspect of it.
If I can give some background, since 1978, which was when the politics took place in terms of deregulation. By the way, this of course occurred under the Carter administration, and again, this issue is not one that is endemic to partisan politics. In 1978, since that time, 198 airlines have been started. 37 survived. In 1986, 418 million people flew. Whereas in 1978, 275 million people flew. So there's been almost a 50% increase in number of passengers. In terms of revenues, in 1978, the accumulation was $18.8 billion as opposed to $40.1 billion in 1978. So you see more of a doubling in terms of revenues. So you do see a very expanding industry.
Absolutely. That's one of the areas that has really strained the customer service aspect of it, something we touched on earlier in the program. We've had to hire, I'm speaking as the industry, have had to hire a lot of people to fill positions. Companies have merged with other companies, bought smaller airlines, and it has put a strain on the customer service aspect of the industry. As the airline management learns how to handle the unwieldy companies, the large scale of this situation, and people get more training, the customer service aspect of the industry is going to come back to where it was before. At one time, actually this is prior to deregulation, the airline industry employee was a prestigious position to hold. Right now we have a lot of new people in the industry, and it's going to take a while for them to build up enough time to be the skilled professionals that they should be.
Are passengers a lot more vocal now? Have the Ralph Naders and David Horowitz had an impact on customers speaking up for what they see as their rights? If they're paying for an airline ticket, they demand service?
I agree they're a lot more vocal. I don't know if Ralph Nader or the other gentleman had much to do with it. I think there are just more people flying who demand a better type of service. We've increased from around 10 to 12% of the American public had flown prior to deregulation. Now it's up to 30% and more. So you're getting a lot more people.
So you've got a whole new group in there.
Absolutely, a new group of people that have never used this type of service before. They're used to a certain type of service. They're expecting a type of service from the airlines, and in some cases they're getting it. In some cases they aren't getting it.
In terms of service, what do airlines need to improve most, Jeff?
I think, for one, the major issue that I'm concerned with is on-time performance trying to get the scheduled flights out at the scheduled times. You're going to have a certain number of mechanical problems or weather problems that we cannot do anything about. When those don't occur, there is no reason why we can't operate as a scheduled industry.
Jeff, I have a question on that. I have to pick up on that question of on time. One of the things I've been reading indicates that part of the problem is due to this tremendous clustering of all the different flights in these major centers at 8 o'clock, for example, in the morning, which is a key time. And the indication I saw was that the landing fee is the same whether it's at that time or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, anything of this nature. Can't the airports, in effect, do a better job? In other words, actually bump the fee at those key times and, in effect, make it so that it's supply-demand oriented so that some of the others would back away from those key times?
That would be a possibility. It's kind of a negative reinforcement as far as trying to get the airlines to change their scheduling.
Reduce the fee at other times. I'll go the other way.
That might be, it's still the same solution. Sure. But the reason there are block times like that, and it does create a lot of congestion, is our bread and butter are where we make our profits is on business travelers largely, and they are traveling at the times, the peak times, 8 o'clock, 4 in the afternoon, 4 to 6 in the afternoon, 7 to 9 in the morning.
But you have companies that have used flexi-time, though. I mean, there has been adjustment within corporation to some degree, and if it's economically wise, won't they adjust?
Well, what we're looking at, though, is, passengers that leave from Chicago O'Hare Airport at 8 a.m. In order to be in New York for a 10:30 meeting. Right. All other businesses aren't going to restructure just because of travel, because of the travel industry.
This is certainly a national, even an international issue, but it's also a Hoosier issue. The perception we have is that the long-haul routes, in other words, are the ones that go from New York to Los Angeles, the prices of those tickets have gone down. Whereas the short-haul routes, the shorter routes, they've stayed about the same or perhaps have gone up. And the thin routes, the ones that would come into the Muncies and perhaps the Lafayettes and the smaller towns in Indiana, those routes have disappeared completely. Is that a reasonable observation?
Partially. The smaller routes, and this is one of the things that they feared would happen with deregulation and the lessening of subsidies to smaller airports. We have not lost any service in Muncie. Many of the smaller communities have, if they have lost any air service, primarily because of economics. One carrier could not exist, two carriers could not exist where one carrier can carry the entire load. So for the most part, I don't think it's reduced the availability of air service from smaller cities.
Yeah.
Cost-wise, cost in the smaller markets has increased somewhat. And the reason being, it is less expensive per passenger mile for the airlines to take a passenger from coast to coast or from the Midwest to one on the coast.
So in Indiana, I would guess that Indianapolis has benefited greatly by deregulation.
I think anyone familiar with the Indianapolis area has seen the increase in the airport, the increase in size, the remodeling down there. It has benefited, yes.
If you look at Evansville or South Bend, Lafayette, those cities are medium-sized cities. Have they gained or lost in the process?
A little bit of both. As Muncie has gained, we gained a few flights for a while, and then it dropped back to the previous level. Lafayette has lost one carrier, but the carrier that's still there has increased their service. South Bend seems to, they have 4 or 5 carriers there. Occasionally they'll lose one and someone else will come in and pick it up again. The routes from those cities are pretty good, really. They feed into the Chicago area or the Indianapolis area. I want to digress for just a second, get back to one of the points that you were bringing up before. The travel from coast to coast or on longer routes, usually you can pick up fares from the smaller cities in conjunction with a carrier that leaves from a major city. That will reduce the cost to practically nil, $20, $30. Where a single point-to-point travel, Lafayette to Chicago, Muncie to Chicago, South Bend to Indianapolis, might be more. If you would fly South Bend to Indianapolis to Los Angeles, it would reduce the fare from South Bend to Indianapolis in turn.
You mentioned how Muncie, typical of a lot of the smaller cities, sees some service, loses some service, comes and goes. Have these areas pretty much settled to where they're going to be now that we've had the rush after deregulation? Are we about where we're going to be when you're talking about the South Bends and the Muncies?
There will be less of that. There's been, well, as John was saying, 198 new airlines formed in a 5 or 6 year period. A lot of it was testing markets, seeing if this service was viable or not. A lot of that experimentation is over now, but it's not that you won't see some new service, but it will be more thought out, more economically feasible before an airline will go into a market like that.
Jeff, we better get the airline controllers in this conversation, because in 1981, 6 years ago, the president fired 75% of those controllers. Is it getting to the point because they also, or their condition also add to the perception of things? Are they getting back to full staff?
I think they're getting a lot closer. I think they're still understaffed. I think that is one of two real problems the federal government has laid on this industry. First of all, getting rid of those controllers has hurt us, definitely. They're going through, not speaking for the FAA, but just my perception is they are reaching a level near what they were before. Talking to the crews I deal with, the Chicago controllers are the best in the business as far as they're concerned. They're very good, very professional, just top notch.
But that leaves less of them available for other places.
Absolutely. They're drawing the more qualified, highly trained controllers into the larger cities, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Indianapolis even. But that's just necessary. At this time, you want to put your best people in the most, in the place with the highest
Well,
volume.
then, in fact, if we have that shortage, in fact, there's some decrease in the margin of safety. I mean, whether it's a perception or not, is there in reality?
I don't think
You
so.
don't
I
think
think
it's effective?
I don't think the margin of safety is decreased per se. I think it's the fact that some of the controllers are working harder than, that was a complaint back in '81 that they were being overtaxed. I think that's even more true today.
Okay, well, one thing that's highly regulated here is the time on this program, and we're out of it.
Very good.
So I appreciate your comments, and thanks to our panelists, Bill Mosier from Marketing here at Ball State, Jeff Franklin, who's Customer Service Manager here in Muncie for the Continental Express commuter, and John Rouse, our Executive Producer. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for joining us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana, 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Bill Mosier and Mike Seaborg. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.